Let's bring in Hollywood divorce attorney David Glass for more on this. David?
People going through divorces are going through some of the hardest times of their lives, and a lot of what they're going through is emotional. And in any divorce, there's a huge sense of loss, and loss of relationship, of money, some friends.
David Glass here for another new episode of The Hourglass, where family law and psychology intersect. I'm a certified family law specialist, former psychologist, and the author of Moving On, Redesigning Your Emotional, Financial, and Social Life After Divorce. Next up is Dr. Beth Leedham. Dr. Leedham, the subject of sex is a delicate one when you're counseling a person who has recently gone through a breakup, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be delicate, but it doesn't have to be. People are really uncomfortable talking about sex because we really don't get trained to.
Right.
But, part of my job is to get people to open up and talk about things, and so we can confront whatever problems have developed.
Sure, so what are some of the do's and don'ts about having sex after a breakup?
Sure, so sexual problems are really common, even among happy couples. They're exceptionally common among couples who eventually break up. In fact, the most common thing that sex therapists see in consultation, the most common problem is desire discrepancies. So one partner has a lot of desire and the other person doesn't have very much desire, which can cause a lot of pain on both sides, actually.
Sure.
Both for the person who is the high desire partner, because that person has experienced perhaps years of frustration and pain and rejection, and hasn't been able to express themselves in an important area that is foundational to quality of life for them.
Right.
It's also painful for the person on the other side of the equation. That person has often experienced a lot of frustration and may have come to feel blamed or defensive, or has been listening to a lot of their partner talking about how their disappointment, right?
Right.
So it's painful for both people. So I guess my overarching message is, if you're recovering from sexual difficulty in the relationship that you've just left, you're not alone, you're in really good company.
Right.
So I have sort of three general areas of do's and don'ts as you're thinking about moving into your future as a sexual person after a big breakup. The first is to really assess how important sex is to you. And it sounds easy, but it really isn't. If you've been in a relationship that's had some trouble around sex, often we're defensive and we can be confused about really how important is this for me now that I don't have to shape myself around another partner, the partner that I was with. And so the first step is really assessing, all right, how important is this to me, and what do I really want out of my sex life?
Yeah.
Being honest with yourself about what you want and need is something that, often people didn't get to do in their prior relationship. And now in a new relationship or a new sexual connection, it's an opportunity to do things differently.
Sure.
And so to learn from the prior mistakes and to go forward doing things differently. And so this is a huge opportunity. So I would say the don't there is to not downplay the importance of sexual compatibility. A lot of people pick life partners for other reasons. I think that person would be a good parent, that person has values that are really compatible with mine, and those are good reasons, but often what they do is to downplay any sexual difficulties they may have, thinking that's really not as important as the other stuff. And sexual problems tend to grow more important over time, not less important. So being able to move forward, being honest, and and being clear about the importance of sexual compatibility for you, or maybe it isn't that important. That's really key. So there's a second set of do and don'ts, which has to do with what sex is supposed to be like. Sex is supposed to be fun.
Right.
It's supposed to be joyful. It can be healing. It can be groovy and tantric if that's what you want. But it isn't supposed to be dreary drudgery. And so it's important to think, all right, well, what do I need to do in order to maximize my chances for the kind of sexual connection that I want? Maybe that means updating your skills. Right? So if somebody went into a relationship 20 or 30 years ago and there were certain things that were off the table in that relationship, maybe they never got good at them. But now's a chance to do some learning. And there are a lot of resources out there available to help people update their skills. But also, it's important to update our attitudes as well and our expectations. Over the course of a long relationship, people age. And the kind of sexual relationship that might have felt right for them early in life may not fit anymore.
Right.
So we can adjust our expectations based on what is really possible for us now. So for example, if somebody, say a man was partnered very early in his life, and had a lot of testosterone early in life and is now divorced after 30 years. Well, testosterone gradually declines over time. That's a normal part of aging. And so if he's expecting himself to be performing at the same level that he could perform, I don't even like the word perform, but to perform sexually at the level he was when he was in his early 20s, it's a really unreasonable expectation. We can also update our standards around or our ideas around monogamy, for example. 20 or 30 years ago, not many people were talking about non-monogamous relationships, but that's really a possibility now that has a place in the culture. And so we have an opportunity to renegotiate that issue for ourselves if we really want to. And we also need to, update our ideas about what our bodies are capable of doing. For example, many people, particularly women, as they age, a decline in estrogen is normal, obviously, and especially with menopause. So many women later in life experience sexual pain. Sex should never be painful, but the tissues of the vagina and the pelvic area can get thin, and we get old lady skin here, and we get old lady skin other places too. So it's never supposed to be painful, and somebody who's experiencing that should get some help from a sex therapist or from a doctor. So the third thing I would say, I just want to give space for, is that many people coming out of a relationship, particularly a long-term relationship, may have concerns about their own attractiveness, especially if it's been a sexually troubled relationship, characterized by rejection. One can often feel like, oh, well, am I still desirable? Will anybody still want me? And that's really normal and common, and there can be a lot of anxiety around that. And my response to that is twofold. We should do things for ourselves, take care of ourselves in such a way that we feel attractive to ourselves. And so if there are things that need updating, for example, our relationship to exercise or our eating habits, this is an opportunity to take care of that stuff, right? But we really need to be attracted to ourselves, and we shouldn't allow ourselves to be oppressed or overwhelmed by unreasonable societal expectations about what that means, right? I like to say, past a certain age, really most of us just want a partner who's naked and smiling. It's about the attitude, right? And so not holding ourselves to unreasonable expectations, particularly the expectations that may have built around porn use. A lot of people use porn now, and it's important to remember that people in porn are professional performers, and they're often athletes, and they're acting. So it's entertainment, really, and we can't expect ourselves or our partners to perform at that level.
Dr. Leedham, what does a healthy sex life look like after a breakup?
Sure. So let me start by talking about what a healthy sex life isn't.
Right.
Okay. So a healthy sex life isn't dependent on frequency. So often I get the question about healthy sex life, but really the person is asking me, how much should I be having sex, or what's normal?
Right.
And one person's normal may not be another person's normal. I know people who are middle-aged and are having sex every day, and I know people who are not having sex at all,
right,
and that's normal for them,
right,
and that's comfortable and healthy for them. So it really doesn't have to do with frequency. It also, people often define sex as a body part being inserted into another body part.
Right.
And for heterosexual couples, often they define sex as penis and vagina.
Right.
Penis and vagina intercourse, right? But that's a really narrow definition of sex. I don't like that definition because it's really restrictive.
Right.
And the problem is that with aging, sometimes we can't have that because, you know, some of our parts may be in hibernation temporarily or
Right.
having a bad day.
Right.
So I like to define sex, healthy sex, as widely as possible. If you are having a sensual experience with your partner where there's erotic energy, that counts as sex. It doesn't have to be limited to a specific set of behaviors. So I think it's really healthy and useful to think flexibly. And I've already said something about porn star sex. You know, healthy sex doesn't have to be porn star sex. So what is healthy sex? Healthy sex is one where there's ongoing enthusiastic consent, right? We all have to be attuned to that.
Yeah.
And what might be consensual on one day might not be consensual on another day, depending on how a person is feeling. So it's important to have healthy communication, and that's
Sure.
really foundational. And like I said before, people are often really uncomfortable and shy talking about talking about sex and getting into a conversation with a partner about sex and what they like and don't like and what their expectations are. But there is a great exercise that I can suggest to people. If you just Google yes, no, maybe list sex, up will come a bunch of examples of this kind of list. It's a list of sexual behaviors, and the people can go through and list, yes, I've done that before and I like it. No, I definitely don't have any interest in ever doing that. Or maybe, I haven't tried it, but I'm open-minded.
Yeah.
It can lead to a lot of great conversations, and it's a really fun conversation to have, maybe over a glass of wine.
Sure,
or on a
sure.
walk or something. And the other thing, obviously, is healthy sex is kind, right? Kind and respectful. And one in which we make our expectations and our limitations clear to our partners so that everybody knows what's going on and we don't have room for misunderstandings or hurt feelings. Right?
Right. And when people are getting divorced, I tell them not to start dating for a year, that they need to take off a year, among other things, to fix themselves, but just to take a break. Is there any sort of rule of thumb that you give out for when you should resume sexual relations with anyone post-divorce?
Yeah. That's a great question. For me, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, and people really vary in what they're ready for. In somebody who's a high desire person who's been in a sexually frustrating relationship where they feel like they've been in sex jail for years, they really want a jailbreak.
Right.
Understandably.
Right.
And none of us is getting any younger. Life is short, and it's important for us to get our needs met. So to me, I think that's really understandable, so long as they are protecting themselves against sexually transmitted infections and taking care of their partners and being aware of consent and communication. For other people, they really need to go slowly, and I think they should really honor that process. Some people need to really get into it very slowly. There may be time for grieving. They may have issues that they need to work through. They may have their own sexual issues or other psychological stuff that they need help with, and that takes time. So I think knowing yourself and being able to recognize what it is that you need and honoring that is really important here.
Absolutely.
I will say one thing, which is that oftentimes people who are in a jailbreak frame of mind, they're prone to infatuation, right? We all know what that feels like.
Yeah.
And they will often dive into introducing their new sex partner to everyone in their family.
Right.
And that, I would say, be particularly careful around your kids.
Right.
Make sure that this is somebody who's going to stick around before you involve them with your children, right? And so that's a good reason to take it a little slow and mindfully.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good advice. Are there lasting negative effects if a person ventures into new sex too soon after a breakup? And what would that look like?
I guess if they're venturing too soon, it means that they weren't ready. And that probably means that there was stuff that they weren't aware of that was important to them that they weren't in a position to take care of. So, not being ready can mean you haven't sorted out what's important to you, or you're not ready to tolerate the inevitable vulnerability that we experience in sexual situations, or they may not be ready to negotiate and communicate clearly about sex and about their sexual expectations, and they may not be ready to dive into intimacy at the rate that maybe the other person is.
Sure.
In terms of lasting effects, well, I mean, we really don't want people to get traumatized, so we don't want them to dive into stuff that may be too scary for them, and especially if somebody's in jailbreak mode, you wanna just make sure that you're not getting yourself into stuff that you may later regret.
Yeah, it makes sense that you would. I just think people would want to figure out what went wrong in the last relationship before you jump into a new relationship and either repeat your own patterns or pick a person who is too much like the last person you were with.
Absolutely, and part of the problem, some people during a breakup, it becomes really easy to see the other person as really the major problem and to downplay our own responsibility in the dynamics that led to a breakup. It happens all the time. It happens to the best of us.
Right.
But really, it is important to take stock of what was your contribution to the dynamics that led to the breakup? What can you take responsibility for? Because that's an opportunity for growth. And it's very valuable learning. As painful as a breakup is, there's very valuable learning to be had there if you're
Yeah.
willing to take advantage of it, so that you can move into the kind of connection that you really want and that can last for you.
Right. Now, is pursuing lots of sex a good way to get over a breakup?
Well, it can be really fun in the short term, but if you really want to get over a breakup, it seems to me to be hopscotching over the grief and the learning that you can do that will really help you recover.
Yeah. Now, what about the situation where having sex after your breakup reminds you of your ex? What can someone do about that?
I guess there could be two things going on there. If the person is reminding you of your ex, maybe there are some things about them that you should be aware of. Maybe those are red flags.
Right.
Or maybe you're projecting some trauma from your old relationship onto the new relationship, and you need to really take stock of what it is that you're bringing into it.
Yeah, wow. Really insightful. What are some of the most common mistakes divorcees make when it comes to resuming their sex life?
Well, one big common mistake is to forget about protection against sexually transmitted infections.
Mm-hmm.
And another common mistake is to do it the way you always did it with your ex,
Right.
not thinking about how this is a new person and we have to learn new people.
Yeah, yeah. What about the situation where you had a great sex life with your ex and you broke up for some other reason? Is it ever a good idea to continue that sexual relationship with your ex-spouse?
I understand it can be tempting, but if the goal is moving on, David,
Right.
that's probably not going in the right direction.
Right. Definitely not moving on. It's staying right exactly where you were. What should you do if you have zero interest in sex, especially if it's been a long period of time since the breakup?
Sure. So it depends on whether you want to have interest in sex. If you have zero interest in sex and that's fine with you, then that's where you are.
Right.
If you want to address why you have less interest in sex than you might like, one place to look is your medical provider, and to bring that up with your physician. Physicians aren't really well trained in dealing with sexual
Right.
problems. Unfortunately, they just don't get that training. So you can also consult a sex therapist. There can be lots of reasons why somebody is not interested in sex. Some of them are underlying medical conditions. Sometimes it's medication related. Sometimes it's psychological. Sometimes it's historical because there's been a history of bad sex, and
Right.
people who have had a lot of bad sex don't want to have sex.
Sure, sure.
So I would say get help.
Yeah, and ask the questions.
Yeah.
How do people find you if they want to consult with you about whatever their sex issues might be?
My address is www.drbethleedham.com.
Great. Thanks so much for coming in today.
Thank you.